So, hey everyone, happy Friday. I'm going to roll the intro in a little bit, but just want to say hi. Um, Keith in the live chat here says, good afternoon. I'm driving and lurking. I thought he said driving and drinking at first. I'm like, no, listen, it's not that kind of a show. I have to say, I appreciate the ceiling light bulb you got going there, Jerry. It, the,
Oh,
I grew up with a lot of like bare ceiling light bulbs, and it really makes me nostalgic. So, yeah, thanks
yeah.
for that.
Took off the cover, so it's like, it's
Hmm.
just a little bit brighter, I guess.
Yeah, that's fine. But yeah, there's so much like we're in this weird spot in crypto where I think everything is happening, but also kind of nothing is happening, and depend in I kind of get like headline overload sometimes, but also underload. It's weird. I don't know if you experience the same kind of a thing.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, yeah, it's just mostly looking at the broader financial system, I guess, and just watching them trying to get in, I guess, right at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. It is kind of funny that I guess we'll talk a little bit more directly on Luke Jr. himself and all that, but it is very interesting to me that this individual rose to this level of like prominence in discussions and things.
We could basically say that for a whole slew of people in the Bitcoin core space.
Hmm. Which is quite an interesting space, to be honest. It's kind of interesting how we're at this weird point where I kind of feel like, at least, the world is like all the cool stuff is happening away from BTC, right? From the rest of the space. People are building all the really cool stuff. But all the price action and institutional things and attention and all that is going towards BTC, or has been for the most part. And there's this kind of like weird malaise in that community, the people who are hardcore in it, not just I bought Bitcoin, it's going up, this is great, we're winning. This weird malaise going on in the community, we're kind of showing here, where there might be a hard fork attempt, again, to be discussed. But then just the actual usage, like Lightning is fizzled out for the most part, and just all the other things going on, it's mostly just like, well, let's see what institutions will hold it. Whereas then you get the whole rest of the world, the whole rest of the space is building lots of cool things and kind of getting not a lot of attention or money or anything. And we're in this weird spot. And it's kind of also where
Yeah,
where crypto won epically in the last November election in the US at least, and then kind of hasn't won yet. It's this weird like yes and no spot we're in.
yeah, I guess the way I kind of look at it, it's like we're able to build a lot of these kind of cool things, but
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't necessarily mean we're gonna get more traction, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like sometimes you build it and then people just don't come because there's so much built. Like, well, where do you actually go to, right? But yeah, overall, I think especially right now, like we're seeing like all this like financial turmoils and whatnot all around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I think mostly it's just, people are just trying to leverage and hedge themselves off of, like over reliance on the US dollar, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where they're gonna go afterwards, it's who knows, right? It might be jumping into a frying pan. It's yeah, it's like if you can, like
Mm-hmm.
stave yourself off from like any sort of like economic turbulence and whatnot, then yeah, it makes total sense that people would just be focusing on Bitcoin right now.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the cliff thing is definitely happening for a lot of people. Where I do feel like the the driving off a cliff thing is happening in a lot of the economy. At the
Mhm.
same time as we've never been in a better position to not have that matter. So it's kind of like burning the ships behind you a little bit, and That's one reason I really care about the adoption of cryptocurrency en masse is that people other will be left behind and not do very well. So I just hope that that doesn't happen. But you know,
Well, I mean, I don't think it's something that crypto can really address head on without, like systemic changes to how the economy is even structured. But yeah, it's a lot of influences, I guess.
yeah, for sure. All right, so let's roll the intro thing on this, and then actually get kind of diving into everything. All right, ready? Three, two, one, go. All right, so hey everyone, welcome officially now. This is the Digital Cash Rundown, episode 204, which means I've done 204 of these live shows, 204 weeks plus, because I've taken some time off for travel, etc. And yeah, really, since 2020, I think. I'm joined by the one and only Jerry. How do you pronounce your last name? I don't want to even try to butcher it first.
It's pronounced Qian.
Yeah, Jerry Chin. So, or also known as Light Swarm on X. Definitely follow him. Good time. How's it going, man?
Not bad, not bad. Just watching this entire clusterfuck go down in BTC land.
Yeah. And it's do you have much involvement in the BTC world? I know that you're more focused on the Bitcoin Cash side of things, but also pretty well connected in just the general crypto space. So, do you have any like direct exposure to the Bitcoin world?
I mean, yeah, like, still interacting with a lot of the people in BTC. I do try to follow and listen to a lot of the Twitter spaces and discussions that they have each
Mm-hmm.
morning. It's unfortunate that nowadays it's mostly just talking about, like the spam data, forks, and all that kind of stuff, whereas before it was, you know, interesting to hear, like how they're going to innovate on, covenants, how they're going to activate it, and yeah, so it's just a general shift in the conversations, I guess.
Yeah, probably not a shift for the better. Well, it is kind of interesting. I guess we'll get to that in a bit about how the both communities, right? The or Bitcoin versus others, including Bitcoin Cash, kind of had a lot of ideas back in the block size war era, and then it was a lot of in the BTC side. It was heavy in the Lightning and other things, and then once Lightning launched, there was a big explosion of like interest, of development, of companies, of all kinds of things, and that kind of like dried up. Then there was like the ordinals boom, kind of gives some much hated, I should say, right? But still positive building momentum. And now it's in this weird, like, people have hyped up Taproot, people have hyped up CTV, a bunch of other things like that, that just never really quite either got implemented or if they did in terms of like Taproot, for example, didn't really change much. And now it's this weird holding pattern where no one
Uh,
really knows what to do.
well, just to correct you right
Oh,
there,
yes.
Taproot and technically SegWit as well, but Taproot really also enabled all these ordinals and inscriptions in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it's like it's working as intended, and then they found out there's also some unintended use cases.
Yeah. Well, before we go on that, what how has it been working as intended? Because we saw the unintended use cases of like the stuff people are fighting over. But what are some of the good things that have come out of it that are people are still using, I guess?
Yeah, so I guess originally with the Taproot, the idea was to have all these different unlocking conditions for your
Mm-hmm.
transactions be put into like whatever the roots or whatever they call it. So things like like how they're doing these pre-signed transactions and all this kind of stuff. So there is like legitimate use cases. I guess it's just and I'll come back and I'll circle back to this point a little bit on, but yeah, I guess like overall it's just a bit of an oversight on some of the edge cases around the implementation that people just did not really factor in or think about, right?
Mm.
And to be fair though, like part of part of the thing is that also like if you look at the mind share of all these blockchain developers, they're largely not in the Bitcoin space, right? They're mostly in like the EVM,
Hmm.
this is in Solana, but I guess, back then it was a lot of these other chains that's, being explored around. So yeah, a lot of, I guess, like factors who played in.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so before we start officially jumping into these things, I got to give the quick shout out to Coin ATM Radar, who has generously sponsored this podcast, and who, by the way, pay me in Bitcoin Cash. So that's my Bitcoin Cash source of income right now. This podcast is very proudly sponsored by Coin ATM Radar. When buying crypto with cash, an ATM is much more reliable and it's safer than meeting some random person in a random place. And unlike an exchange, which could freeze your account, especially if you're trade ogre and then the Mounties go take you down, huh? You truly own all the crypto that you buy. With Coin ATM Radar, you can find crypto ATMs and other services where you could buy or sell cryptocurrencies for cash. On the website, search by coin address if the ATM supports selling as well as buying, and you can also search by geographical area such as country, state, city, etc. And check current fees across different ATMs. Find out more at coinatmradar.com, which is coinatmradar.com. So, are ATMs still a big thing where you're at these days? Or I know that in like most of Western Europe, they've really kind of died out, and I still see them all over the place in the U.S. though.
Yeah, the ATM machines that I've seen, the uh, uh, the one that I've seen anyways, only allowed you to buy, but you can't sell, so you can't get cash out, I guess, right?
Hmm.
Uh, and there has been in the past few years a few cases where, scammers were targeting, vulnerable people, elderly, whatever. And then there's like a few reports of that. So, but yeah, no, overall it's not very common, I guess. And even when you do see them, it's still fairly expensive to use. So it's like a 7.5% spread up and down.
Yeah, which is wild to me. Um, I've kind of like as I've used ATMs before to exclusively to sell, of course, if ever I need some paper when I'm traveling. But it's the fees are always, I mean, I have actually they have been very variable, right? I've seen some relatively low fees, like a 3% or something like that. But then I have seen them as high as like 15% or more. Not as common these days, but in the early days they got it pretty crazy like that, and yet they had tons of business. And I think a lot of people just don't even think about the fees when using that. But it is always a good thing to have as an option. Um,
Yeah, yeah, especially for like the emergency funds and whatnot.
mhm.
But yeah, like nowadays, I haven't really seen too many ATMs as is, but the ones
Hmm.
I have seen, it's mostly just you feed in the money and then they'll send you some Bitcoins.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like the standard model. A lot of people kind of, you know, do it that way. Yeah, before we jump into the whole knots drama, I did want to highlight if you're using the Brave browser today, there's an interesting dash ad that pops up when you open a new tab. So just want to give a shout out to that because I kind of did have a little to do with that, and it's a lot of people have been posting stuff about it. So wanted to throw that out because as I opened a new tab to then show off like to show off in the new store, I'm like, oh, might as well talk about this now that we have it. But if anyway, the main thing is there was this story by The Rage, a publication called The Rage. It says leaked Luke Dashjr Jr. I don't know how people actually say it, but people say it all kinds. Luke Jr. plans a hard fork to save Bitcoin. Text messages shared with The Rage show that the Knots maintainer is considering a hard fork to implement a trusted multi-sig committee that can retrospectively alter the blockchain to remove illicit content. It's this big sensationalist article with some like signal message screenshots and things like that. So before we get too much into the actual like dissecting the details of this whole thing, how much of this have you seen previously, and what's kind of your like initial reaction to all that?
Yeah, I briefly glanced at I think it got released like yesterday or 2 days ago. Very, very recently,
It was
the
like
past.
last night because when I was doing
Okay.
like a space on it yesterday up until like 4 p.m. Eastern or so, and then I didn't see any of this until I went to a meetup, and when I came back, this had all gone. I'm like, oh wow.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, so I don't know. Whenever I hear there's like a small council, I guess, of people making these kind of decisions, um, it always, gives me a bad taste. It leaves a bad taste in my mouth, I guess. Because like one, who exactly assigned these people to be, the arbiters of whatever whatever you want to look at. Uh, and two, it just goes down a really, really shady path, right? It's like, well, if you guys could do this, what else are you guys, opening up yourselves to?
Yeah, absolutely. The shadiness of that is kind of like the planning behind the scenes, which to be fair, kind of happens in just about everything in crypto, sort of. But you'd like to believe that it's not. It's open source stuff. That everything's done out in the open. Discussions are done in the open, and a lot of projects I think have more of that kind of a thing going on. But with I think the probably the theme of this entire core versus knots deal, because I don't really find personally the technical arguments super compelling in either direction. It's the social and governance discussions I find very interesting and undefined. And when they're undefined, that's when the off-chain governance, just like you have off-chain transactions with Bitcoin, you also have off-chain governance, and you have opaque things like this, and it kind of makes more sense to me that that would be happening. But I agree, it's kind of like disappointing.
Yeah, and I guess one of the main things that there's no real rigid or formal process for any of this stuff, right? It's just, as you mentioned, it's open source, anyone could, submit whatever and yeah, just see, right? So it is a bit hectic, I guess, how people are doing it. But yeah, no, like as you mentioned, this is largely just a social issue, I guess. Like there is no technical discussions really. It's just largely like, hey, a group of people don't want these kinds of characteristics on their chain, so they want to change that, right? Um, yeah, and I guess, like this is one of the things where, like, a lot of the concerns that it was initially put out was really just, like the spam information from the ordinals, right? Like they don't want to see JPEGs, they don't want to have all this kind of stuff. And somehow it is morphed into, quote unquote CP, which we probably won't
Yeah,
mention, but uh,
CSAM or whatever the acronym they're using these days, but nasty
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, definitely highly illegal, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just like how exactly do you go from JPEGs to stuff like that as, the arguments, right? So yeah, to me, it's just someone must be behind the scenes funding all this kind of stuff because it makes no sense to me otherwise.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. On the space we did yesterday, we did kind of go into some of this stuff. The funding stuff is interesting. First of all, the core team is always, as far as I remember, right, for the last decade, worked on and implemented things that serve specific corporate interests sometimes. So, such as, for example, Lightning Network needed some of these things that SegWit provided, for example, other L2s, and then everything seemed to be okay. We need Taproot because of XYZ. We need these things for whatever. And I'm not, I've never gotten it super clear. Maybe you know more than me on this about the op return limit, which is what is causing this to be an issue right now. It's not just there were JPEGs, therefore there's an issue. It's that the newest version of Bitcoin Core is going to, from my understanding, remove the per transaction data limit for the op return field, and also make it so you can't manually adjust it in your node. It's just like you can't set your own limits. Like that part seems to be going. I've heard that. Correct me if I'm wrong, because there's a lot of weird misinformation. Very few people in BTC directly know what's going on, and so definitely I can't necessarily. But yeah, that seems to be a thing. I guess all that to say, I don't know anyone who's asked for this yet. Is there a single company that's like, We would really be able to build on Bitcoin way better if this was uncapped. Have you heard of any of those?
Yeah, so originally I think it was Jeremy yesterday who mentioned this as well, but uh I think originally it wasn't these guys directly, but the group called Citrea, the company who's doing
Mm-hmm.
the L2 on Bitcoin. They didn't, I don't think they said they needed the op return limit to increase and whatnot. But I think what they mentioned was that it would help them and make a few things easier. But the current tap routes and all the data you can put in there is, I think it's sufficient enough right now. Um, so I guess the main thing is that, like mostly it's just like, like a few companies, a few technology plays. No one really is asking for this, I guess. I mean, it is nice to increase the limit a little bit, but yeah, and also quite honestly, with the way that they were approaching it too, it was very, very strange because essentially the core team just said, "Hey, we're gonna release a client. It's gonna have these, increased limits on the op return," and then that was the initial cause of all these uproar and whatnot. And then they went line by line. It's like, okay, do we have any disagreements? Do we have any disputes here? No, no, no. Okay, then it's settled. And I'll be honest, I haven't seen a consensus being formed around, just pushing down solutions down people's throats. And it's like, well, what's
Mm-hmm.
wrong, right? So yeah, it's just kind of interesting to see how,
Yeah, and I think that that's what really set people's like alarm bells off is that lack of consensus kind of thing. It's just like, we're gonna do this. Like, why? Might help some companies, okay, and it kind of doesn't seem like it's worth backing off of maybe because once you're like, oh, I think this would be a good thing, then it's like, okay, there you go. But yeah, it's pretty wild to see just the amount of drama that that generated. Now, I will say two things about like the funding thing. First of all, there seems to be some sort of funding because it's Ocean Pool is the big mining pool that is not it is basically complicit in the filtering of the JPEGs as it were, right? And um, at the node level, it doesn't matter super much if your node's mempool doesn't have these transactions or you don't record them. It doesn't really matter that much. It's just like mining nodes are what matter, i.e. miners. And Ocean Pool is funded by, I would say, largely Jack Dorsey. I don't know the rest of it, of course, but as far as I know, he's kind of the main financial driver behind that. And they have sort of anointed all these different accounts. For example, Luke Jr. himself is a he has an Ocean Pool affiliate account on X, for example. And so it seems like Ocean Pool is the funded element that's pushing this, which is strange to me. Like, I don't think there's any business need for this other than maybe it's a differentiating factor for Jack Dorsey's interests, or maybe he just has a personal interest in it, or maybe he just happened to fund a pool run by a bunch of crazies, and it just his money is accidentally powering the Knots revolution. But there's that. But also, I will say there's this weird, there's this intellectual phenomenon that I've observed in crypto that I like to call BDS or bag holder derangement syndrome. And it's weird that it's happening in Bitcoin because Bitcoin's bags have been doing very well as opposed to usually when you see a crypto project and it's not doing well and people can't come to terms with why. They fixate on one little thing like this, the coin emission is just a little too fast or a little too slow, and that one thing is destroying everything. There's nothing else that matters other than this one little thing. And so I kind of get this like maybe there's some BDS vibe from a lot of Knots people where they're just like, this is the thing. This is the thing that's keeping everyone from using Bitcoin as money is that the JPEGs. We have to purge the JPEGs. So I don't think there has to be funding behind it to get a decent amount of traction from that. But there is still some funding.
yeah, I guess like I'll just mention this about the funding. So again, like I don't know who or what might be funding it, and quite honestly, once you're, above a certain amount of wealth, I'm not sure if you can micromanage all that money yourself, right? It's probably
Hmm.
some, it's like, hey, we'll just funnel some money down there and whatnot. But yeah, I think like quite honestly, there's, if this could be caused by just one company, financing it, then I really just have to question, like, what exactly is the stability of the network? Not in just in terms of the tech, but also on the social level, right? It's like where exactly do people actually agree on, in terms of like the future of this?
Yeah, absolutely. It is definitely like I think like an egg on your face kind of moment of that. But also from the appearance of this, the group, the swarm of people that have kind of come out in the not side, they seem to be the same people who are the same, maybe not all the same individuals, but a lot of them, but on who were also going after the UASF stuff during the Segwit Wars. And it seems almost like there's this weaponized shock troop of people that the core team sort of, I mean, or all the liaisons between all the different people, it's very like opaque and we don't really know for sure, but it was all the people on the small block side use these to kind of like generate a appearance of consensus and sort of like strong arm through the SegWit and no block size increase back then. And now it seems like it's just like they've almost, it's like I mentioned, like the hyenas at the end of The Lion King. It's almost like they turn against Scar and all them who had been using them to rule before. And there's a little bit of an element of that maybe, where there's a bunch of rowdy people that got really into like, Bitcoin's super important for money and I just need to run my own node and all that stuff. And now they're still about that today.
Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, it might just be the useful idiots that have run out their usefulness, right?
Yeah.
But no, even as you mentioned, on that point about the like running your own nodes and whatnot. I mean, that's fine to run your own node, but unless you're going to be using it at home, where you have that private access, like how else are you going to use it? Are people from outside in the public going to access it? Right? Then it's like exposing all these security gaps and whatnot. So yeah, like it's quite honestly, it's like a lot of the talking points have really been stuck in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of it is really just going back into like what could get people to be frightened, to be fearful, so that, like, oh, okay, these guys, they seem to know what they're doing. Let's just listen to them, right? They say to run
Mm-hmm.
this software, let's just run that software because I'm not technical enough, and what they're saying sounds pretty scary,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of like just trust us on both sides, right? There's oh my gosh, this is a huge problem, and oh my gosh, this is a not a problem at all, and just shut up and shut up and unbound your op return, like that kind of thing. Like the thing about I kind of feel like a lot of it's also a result of a technical misunderstanding, where I've never seen a outside of Bitcoin, I've never seen a more pedantic group of people about the little finer points of like how things work, like as far as the nodes and the how do the mempool work here. Like generally, I understand all of that stuff, but as far as like what happens if if each individual node doesn't include into the mempool, and then at scale here, and then what if you like just very like I think that a lot of that knowledge was used as kind of like technical spam, almost like to distract people and confuse people during the block size war, and now it's still kind of around. I noticed that a lot of people in both sides, I would say, of the knots versus core thing today, don't seem super technical, especially on the knot side. They don't seem to really understand how any of this stuff works. So, for example, from my perspective, if I was in the knots camp, I would probably also, yes, want to not store extra data that I thought was dumb on my node, or especially stuff that I considered to be illegal. I'd want to just not have that on my computer for, you know, regulatory reasons, but also just I don't want to spend money on disk space for the stuff I don't care about, right? But as far as like what the network does, the Bitcoin blockchain as a whole, I either wouldn't care or I'd be doing things other than running knots. I'd be going after mining pools and telling them you got to stop including this, or I'd be trying to hard fork or whatever. It just seems very strange, and a lot of this has to do with before we get into like the Luke stuff more specifically, just on him. Do you think there's a chance that none of this is really about whatever it's about, and it just is a weird coincidence that finally Luke Jr.'s craziness took hold? That it's just literally him having weirdness about weirdness like he always has. And then now finally it just happened to resonate by pure chance with a bunch of people. And then there you go. Do you think there's any of that accidental element, or is that maybe, hard to believe?
I don't think it's by accident. I think it's by design.
Yeah.
Like everything else, I agree with you. I just don't think it's by accidents, right? Because like again, it was the Bitcoin core people that just it's not even unanimous. It's just like one-sided. We're just gonna go with this change,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they could have taken any other approach to it, but they decided to, I guess, make the most disruptive approach to it.
Mm-hmm.
And like let's not forget, like Luke Jr. and like the core team, Blockstream and whatnot, they've had, what, like over 10 years of working relationships, right? If there's secret messages about this, I'm sure there are secret messages about other stuff as well on other platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Um, no, but honestly, it's like if you look at a lot of this stuff right now, right? Like, I mentioned before, like there's covenants in Bitcoin that, like they're trying to activate and whatnot. There's all these different companies, and even Michael Saylor's like, oh yeah, whatever forks we go to, that's the one we're gonna hold, and we're just gonna dump the other ones, right? So it honestly, it might just be a miniature experiments by people who think that the crypto space is still relatively small compared to what they're dealing with.
Yeah, it could be. One thing I think is interesting, and we covered in the space, of course, but uh, first off, Luke has had knots running since before Bitcoin Cash broke off, even as far as I remember. It's just been, and like he was like him and two people were like running nodes. Just he just didn't like the way things were. His weird quirks were just always there, and so just by weird coincidence, it became important to today. But I, despite that, a lot of high profile people in Bitcoin really started to take his side recently, where now it looked like it. I would have considered, I would say pretty confidently that the core side of things had sort of lost the narrative war, or was in the process of losing the narrative war. And you even had people like Adam Back, who's kind of viewed as like the godfather of Bitcoin. And by a lot of, like, he's kind of viewed as like in the BTC community. Again, I talk a lot of smack about him. I call him Adam Bank and put a little bank emoji next to it. I'm not very respectful
I'll
to.
be
Yeah.
honest. I'll be honest. In terms of Adam Back, and I know this is a side tangent, but other than his work on the Hashgraph, which or Hashcash or whatever, right,
Mm-hmm.
that Satoshi mentioned and attributed, I have no idea what any other contributions Adams had since Bitcoin launched. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can't think of a single contribution other than creating Blockstream, right? So
Yeah. You know, I will, like, this is where I'm going to steel man his cypherpunkness just a little bit before I go the opposite direction, of course. Obviously, Hashcash was like a big thing that was like mentioned. There are some other technical things. One thing that I like that he was involved heavily with the most is something called confidential transactions, which is obviously used straight away in like the liquid sidechain and some other things, but it just cryptographically hides the balance of addresses and amounts. And like Monero had significantly worse privacy in 2017, but the beginning of the year they implemented CT. So ring CT, ring signatures plus CT was kind of like the standard for privacy on that. Just about every single privacy focused anything has a CT element. So like that one piece of cryptography has really, I think, helped a lot of the crypto space, and I probably will continue to do so. And it's kind of funny how a lot of big, like Circle and PayPal, are both implementing CT for their stable coins because no one wants to pay where if like the barista can look up how much money you have, they want to at least keep that one part confidential. So that is a big piece of legacy as well. And it's not just him. I think Greg Maxwell and some other people might have been involved. Again, a lot of people I also don't like. But despite that, it seems like most of what he's done in the last decade has been run a centralized payments rail company, Blockstream, and hijack Bitcoin, in my opinion. Get book on the wall and everything. Also has been to run a scammy Bitcoin treasury company, which he's the CEO of right now as well. And then other than that, he's just hardcore cyberpunk. Adam Back says the Bitcoin price. It's all about price talk for him now. So despite that, I would say I noticed that Bitcoin maximalists like to sort of kill the notion of Satoshi a little bit because Satoshi's not there, and if he was, they know that they wouldn't like what he would have to say about things like scaling. So the stand-in is Hal Finney could have been Satoshi. I don't think he was personally, but so therefore he's our guy, and because also he's dead, he can't argue, and he said some stuff about like custodians and banks and L2 stuff that they like attached to. So he's kind of like the semi-Satoshi, and the Satoshi heir, who's not Gavin Andreessen, who's the literal heir, is Adam Back to their mind. He's the guy. He's the intellectual godfather of Bitcoin, according to them. And so when he started trotting out to oppose the not stuff, that's like we're bringing the big guns. This guy's like, oh, children, chill out. But then now he's like, and then that stopped working. In fact, that stopped working to the extent where people are saying who's running his account. Because the cognitive dissonance is they cannot believe that he would be on what they consider to be the wrong side of this. But they also are not accepting what he's saying. They're not saying, well, he says it, he must be right. They're like, no, filters work, we're filtering. He's a cool guy, but only because I don't believe that he's saying what he's actually saying. It's a kind of weird mental gymnastic right there.
Yeah, that's what can I say? It's I wouldn't be surprised if, someone was controlling his account, but then again, it would make sense for him to, like take a position that's unpopular or like not part of the masses and whatnot. Uh,
Yes.
I think ultimately though, I really don't like this dynamic of, these personalities being the main focus, especially when it comes to, these kinds of super heavy technical, it's like major decisions for the entire network, that kind of stuff, right? Like, you and I, we're talking, that's fine, right? It's not like we're gonna be, setting the directions for whatever chain in the next, 10 years or so. But yeah, I think like quite honestly, we should have it would be nicer to see a more merit-based discussion, or
Mm-hmm.
at least, that kind of theme of discussion. Whereas right now, it's really much just, like I am, so and so in this space. These are my reputation. How dare you come into this space and talk whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm just gonna keep throwing mud at people and then bring in all this other stuff, right? So yeah, and I think we mentioned it early on. It's like all of this discourse, I guess, has very little, if anything, to do with the technicalities of the technology, of the chain, of the network, and all that. It
Mm-hmm.
really is just a social discourse. People don't like the data, they don't like the spam, they don't like how blah blah blah. So yeah, it's just two sides having a social fight.
Yeah. And I think it's a social fight over, first of all, the state of Bitcoin where it is today. I feel like the big data side is just the realism side, as far as you're not scaling to hundreds of thousands of users on chain. You are the off chain scaling spending stuff, like the money stuff, the lightning stuff just didn't really take off. And to sustain the network, we need to explore other things. That's just the brutal reality of where the small block kind of trajectory went. This is where we are. And I feel like the core camp is very realistic about that. Whereas I kind of feel like the Knots camp is more in denial about that, where they're like, no, it's got to be money for everyone. And when they see these JPEGs, that's reality, that this is what this is what will pay the miners. And that's why the miners are paying for them. That's why the fees go up to like, I don't remember how much per transaction, like 80 plus average or whatever per transaction for spikes. That's the state of Bitcoin today, and they're in denial about it. They're still living in the 2017 era where they're like, I can still run everything on my node and I can still pay for a coffee with Bitcoin if I want. And they just don't want to acknowledge where they're at now. So they're fighting against reality almost. Or they're fighting for an idealistic past. Maybe that's a more generous way of saying that. But then also it's between who gets to decide. Is it the very opaque group of core contributors, or is it the mob? And it's kind of like the mob controlled by core contributors is what won out in 2017. But now it's just like, okay, who's really in charge? Where where core let the mob think they ran things, and now that the mob's against them, they're just like, that's not working out that way.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like when you have a mob like that, is anyone really in charge unless you just have like that one charismatic person, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, just going back to, like why exactly people want to do this, or no, maybe the timing and whatnot. It might be, like just in terms of like the global geopolitical and economic situations and whatnot, it might be an attempt to, like stall and delay any sort of, like Bitcoin adoption,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're going to have a hard fork about it, right? So, for nation states that are trying to get off the US dollar and trying to be less reliant on it, now what they do, right? Oh, you buy Bitcoin, potentially it could fork off in the next year or two. And then what do you
Mm-hmm.
have? Right?
Yeah, it could be interesting. I did point that out on the space about that in 2017 it was like like nerds and libertarians using this stuff, and that's it. And it was a nerd war sort of, but it was like the way it resolved itself, not the conclusion, but the way the public discussions, the arguments about this, the running the node, doing specialized versions of the software, and all that stuff was fine. Now you have big institutions and governments involved, and like I don't know if they feel comfortable seeing nerd wars resolve how their wealth works. That's like you never have like people altering the atomic composition of gold over this like fight over like metallurgists, specific, nitpicky technical opinions. It's like that never happens, and so it could be kind of interesting. One thing I think is interesting is it seems like the Knot side kept on winning, and then this story came out about this hard fork thing, and I have to say a few things from my personal experience in working with media and things like that, and the timing of when the story dropped, plus all these big figures in the core side, including Adam Back being like acting surprised, but somehow immediately sharing the article as soon as it came out. I've done this before, but not in a dishonest kind of a way. But I've been like, okay, I'm working with this. The story's going to drop tomorrow, and then as soon as it does, it just gets shared out, and everyone's just ready to share it. I feel the cadence. They did this. This was conspired. Someone told the whole rest of the core world, hey, Lola Elites, hi Lola, is going to drop this article on the Rage. When that happens, everyone get ready to share it because this is how we turn the information tide around. So there was some bit of conspiracy towards that. That's my opinion, with no knowledge, by the way. I see the signs. This is what I think happened. I don't know. Do you kind of think that that's fair, or is it just they were waiting when a positive story for them broke? They just happened to be hungry to jump on it.
Yeah, no, I think they're highly sentient AI that's just able to, never sleep or whatnot and always scanning all these posts and stuff like that. No, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, swims like a duck, all that kind of stuff, it's probably a duck, right? It looks too clean to it looks too clean and coordinated to, just be a mere accident at this point. But
Mm-hmm.
I guess, like it, to me anyways, it's more interesting to see like what exactly can people get out of it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like what's the end goal for all this, it might not be the actors who's being super vocal, it might be people behind the scenes, right? But what exactly are the effects, the end goals that could come out from all this that people could either to be there to their it's either to their benefit or to their detriment, right? But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, what exactly are the consequences of all this? And the one that I always I can't really shake off, but it does feel like it's like a small pilot run to see how much control people have over the data that goes on chain, right? Um, and yeah, just you can just slowly go down that slippery road, slippery slope, however you want. But overall, it's like this definitely seems quite manufactured. You
Mm-hmm.
probably be achieving a lot of objectives all at once. But yeah, it just seems like it's almost testing the limits of how much can we control the data versus, like when I was just saying, screw you.
Yeah, it could be testing the limits. I kind of feel like, so here's my conspiracy theory, right? And I'm gonna throw this post up on the screen. There's a some guy Bitcoin to Oblivion basically says that he believes that this strategy was just to attack Luke personally as much as possible to distract from the thing. Someone commenting said this last attack on Luke feels like a psyop, or he misspelled it, but whatever. Then Adam Back comes out of nowhere and says, "How come it comes with receipts then?" Screenshots of his own IMs, and the author says they've seen the video proof also. And then video proof of what? Says hide confirmation from a reliable source. I don't think he's denying it. When he responds liar, that's just misleading. To which Luke chimes in, no, it means you lied again. So Luke is sort of denying a lot of this stuff. He's saying, well, liar, that's not true. And here's my, again, you get to tell me if I'm full of it or not. What I think happened is there was supposedly going to be Samson Mao and was going to mediate a discussion or help a discussion between Adam Back and Luke Jr. in the last week or so. I saw some conversations about that. So what I think the entire thing was a setup, right? Where they got him into a private conversation and then they started talking specifics, and Adam, as a very intelligent, technically competent cryptographer, starts talking about zero knowledge proof stuff, which is in these messages, saying, "Oh, maybe you could do it this way or that way or whatever." And then somehow there's a phrasing of things where it's like, "Yeah, I think we should do this." I heard, and this is where I have not done my due diligence, and I apologize for that. Some people have said that Luke Jr.'s idea, when he says hard fork, is a different definition than what an actual hard fork is. So they knew he's a nut, and he used this weird version of terminology to say hard fork when he didn't mean it. And then they just screenshotted that and leaked it to the press, and then acted surprised when it came out that this is whole thing. Like they set a trap for him so they could lure him into saying something they could use to character assassinate, which is why Back in particular is just on this all the time, everywhere. Do you think there's any validity to that? Is it all in my head? What do you think?
I mean, potentially. I did see that message about the private conversation between the two. Again,
Mm-hmm.
just going back to the personalities, it's like if this is what the state of Bitcoin is, right? You need two people in a private conversation to iron out all this kind of stuff, then I really just have to question the resiliency of the entire network, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because in my mind, like a healthy network, or at least a dynamic network, is supposed to be open discourse, right? Like you have multiple people on however many sides, right? It might not just be two sides. It might just be like all these different sides, all these things, whatnot, and everyone's just sharing into the overall conversation, right? To have a private call, and again, it's like who decided, like these were the qualified people to actually be in the call like this, and then to then quote unquote have the authority to say, oh yeah, no, so this is the going to be the outcome. This is what we're going to follow afterwards, right? It's like that to me makes very little sense in terms of exposing it. I mean, yeah, definitely, right? If Luke Jr. has not been the most effective communicator, I guess, in the Bitcoin space.
Liar. I love
That
that.
should be his trademark, like
It
it's
is like, and I'm not the
liar's
only one to
trademark.
do this. There's a lot of people that anytime he's mentioned, sort of respond just all caps liar to something.
Liar.
He does that a lot.
Yeah. No, honestly, like my earliest recollection of Luke Dash Jr. is is that interview. I think it was in Japan or somewhere, where this female interviewer was like, "Why do you like Bitcoin?" And he was just
Hmm.
struggling to come up with any ideas, right? So, yeah, no, like if you say that, like, oh yeah, he his version of hard fork doesn't actually result in a network split, whatever, right? Maybe it's a hard fork in terms of like just the coding terms, right? You fork the code base, you fork the like whatever these functions and whatnot, but it's still the same network, right? That
Hmm.
potentially, definitely potentially. Leaking it out, yeah, absolutely. I can definitely see that. Again, I just have to wonder, it's like, how did it come down to, these few handful of people in a back room deciding the fate of like what basically like countries around the world are trying to like put their money in, right? So it's like, how do we end up
Yeah,
in this?
and I mean, just to be like super, like blunt on like the governance thing. Governance. A lot of protocols have a governance mechanism spelled out technically, but even those, as well as the ones that don't, have a governance process that is that exists or doesn't and needs to be
Yeah,
defined. And so, for example, like a good example of something that has the same on the technical level, the same governance system, Bitcoin Cash has the same as Bitcoin on the technical level, but in reality, it's very different. And I think that had to be defined. Where you had in the early days, Amari and Bitcoin ABC kind of just fork off, and then there you go. And it seemed like it
but
was
don't forget BSV, right?
well,
They're not the only
we're not even there yet, right? We're pre BSV right now. So
Oh,
we got
really? I thought ABC forked off after BSV.
no, ABC was the first one. It forked off before SegWit got implemented into BTC, and then there
Oh,
was
okay.
the hash war which happened. So
Right. Okay.
at
I thought you were talking about after BCH split off from BTC.
yes, it is after. So BTC split off from you know, Bitcoin Cash split off. Then there's
Right.
kind of three communities in there roughly. There's the ABC community, there's like the Bitcoin.com and BCH current community kind of thing, and there's the SV people all under the same chain. And then there was a hash war because I remember this very vividly because Craig Wright and all his folks got really angry when Amari wanted to, again, the governance system wasn't defined yet. Amari was trying to, I think it was canonical transaction ordering, or it was one of those like
Yeah.
things they freaked out
So
over.
yeah. So it's actually so BSV split off from BCH in middle of November, November 15 of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And then the ABC, which is now eCash,
Mm-hmm.
XEC, they split off oh, funny enough, it's also November 15th, but it's 2 years afterwards in 2020. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, like overall, it's like, like in the BCH space, I guess, there is definitely a more structured process for all these different upgrades, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like people still follow, this, quote unquote chip process, which is very, very reminiscent of the bit process. And yeah, depending on whether, people think these kinds of proposed upgrades are, good changes and whatnot, they'll try to implement it. And yeah, there's even a 6 month window before the upgrade hits mainnet,
Mm-hmm.
where people are able to test it on one of these test nets, these designated test nets, and just like play around. Maybe they'll find a bug somewhere, and then they'll patch it up, they'll fix it, all this kind of stuff. But yeah, this it's basically very, very structured and not necessarily regulated, but everyone just comes to expect how everything is going to be playing out, right? So there's
Yeah.
no real surprises for people.
Yeah, it's defined today. In the very beginning of it, I would say the governance system was more like Amari wants to do something, and then there was a disagreement over what he wanted to do. So therefore, BSV forked off. And so then from then on, it's Amari wants to do something. And if Amari and kind of Bitcoin.com/Roger don't are kind of on the same page, then that's kind of the governance process, sort of. That didn't work out super well. So then there was the forking off of eCash, and now the actual chip process being like defined, and now you know how things happen. But it's like working out the governance model of how that works, and then that's kind of where we're at now. I'll go back. So Risen in the comments was saying like, what's another Luke definition of hard fork? I'm actually curious now. So I asked Grok to explain it, and he says, Dashjr, however, rejects the concept of a contentious hard fork entirely, arguing that no such thing exists. To him, a true hard fork is only a legitimate consensus-driven upgrade where the entire network adopts the new rules without disservice or divergence, leaving old, non-upgraded nodes entirely non-functional on the new chain, but without creating an altcoin. If there's any contention or lack of universal agreement, he views it not as a hard fork of Bitcoin, but as an attack on Bitcoin, a rebellion, or the creation of a separate altcoin. So his definition of a hard fork is technically a hard fork, right? So like, for example, when say Bitcoin Cash adds something new or whatever, and then everyone upgrades and people who don't upgrade are no longer in consensus with the new chain, strictly speaking, that is a hard fork. However, BCH and BSV or whatever, these chain split hard forks are also technically hard forks as well as they split the chain. However, Luke Jr. would say that's just an attack. Liar, that's an attack. That's an altcoin, whatever. It's only a hard fork if it continues on there. So if you look at this if you re-look at the article or the leaked messages from that definition, he just said, technically a hard fork, but since it's buried, should be safe. So basically, he would advocate for a hard fork, but not splitting the chain. And the sensationalist headlines, including sharing from people like Adam Back, who know him and are very technically competent, you know he's not talking about splitting the chain, but you got him to say the word hard fork, and therefore they're like, that means splitting the chain, and in bad faith are spreading this all over the way. That's what it seems like to me. I don't know. Do you think it's a fair interpretation?
I mean, it's one of the only viable interpretation, right? Look, here's my kind of take on this. I feel like in the Bitcoin Core space, in the BTC space, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really isn't so much about making things usable and like making it useful for people. It really is just, trying to use it as a vehicle to basically just supplant the current financial system.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever that could happen on the network that threatens that entire narrative, right, is basically, in my view, a quote unquote attack on Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you're gonna split off and whatnot, then yeah, like the countries around the world, they'll be like, why bother buy Bitcoin when there's all these different splits and whatnot, right? So there goes that financial incentives, so on and
Mm-hmm.
so forth. But yeah, like if you look at like the technicals and whatnot, right? Like I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure people can come up with whatever jargons that they want, but because we're not being super strict about it, yeah, I can say, like, oh, I love all these like contract systems. And then people
Mm-hmm.
outside people will be like, oh, legal contracts? No, 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 smart contracts. And then
Mm-hmm.
the regulators will be like, oh, so these smart contracts are also legal, right? There's a lot of, like it doesn't end, right? All this, it's basically just a big game of telephone and it really just doesn't end, right? So how you want to, really just craft that message, I think that's the most important part. It's like if you need someone to play the bad guy, this is the perfect way to do it, right?
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
uh it's kind of like controlled opposition. You know what they're going to do. It's going to be, damage controlled, but you're still going to have the bad guy that you want.
Absolutely. And I think so. Luke is an eccentric person. He's had this knots thing for before the Bitcoin Cash split. He has admitted he wants to. I don't know if he has or he wants to raise cats for consumption, like a bunch of he has a very strange religious ideology where it's like a strict Roman Catholicism, but not the current Roman Catholic Church, something else. There's a bunch of he's a very strange person. And I have to say, like, I have not agreed with him on basically anything, but I have a lot of sympathy for him because he's on a few different spectrums at least. And I think he's been taken advantage of in this situation in by both sides a little bit. I think whoever is powering the Knots thing, the whole Knots resurgence, is kind of using his eccentricness to, you know, to kind of get him on, you know, the side of whatever agenda they have going on. And I definitely feel like this setup was I mean, it really does feel kind of gross because it's people that were like, I would say, friends and colleagues of his for many, many years seem to have deliberately set him up and taken advantage of his uniqueness to catch him in some kind of a word, using a word that would then be later used to crucify him, basically. And it feels really gross and ugly the way this has happened, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's, it might just be an effect of interacting with people online, because I
Mm-hmm.
do recall him being on a few panels this summer talking about this whole entire subject, right? And yeah, I'll be honest, I don't think it really just brought that much attention. It
Mm-hmm.
was healthy discussions back and forth, but I really don't think people cared too much about it. So again, it might be useful to just to, stir up some controversy. Yeah, yeah, maybe he got set up, but it's still controlled opposition, right? You're not
Mm-hmm.
gonna be, oh, because, like all this kind of stuff, we're literally gonna have a serious attempt at splitting Bitcoin again with minor support and all these financial backers, right? It's like, no, we're still probably going to just see one Bitcoin. There's probably not going to be a split. But, like in terms of the social trust, I think, like overall, it's definitely going to be lose-lose for most people. But I don't know, for the core, it might be, a slight gain, I guess, a little bit of resurgence back into, um, I don't want to say authority, but I guess, the perception of authority that they have, the aura of authority.
Yeah. It is, you know, every time you fight off a battle and you win, it does strengthen your incumbency, right? And so, like, Core won the first round, then their legitimacy is challenged this second round, and if they win it in a way where people acknowledge that they won it rather than they acknowledge that they just forced their will on the protocol, but the users don't like it. Like if they feel like a legitimate win of some kind, then that just makes them even more solidified. It is kind of interesting. The So I have a lot more sympathy to the core arguments on the technical. I have no sympathy for either side here, really. Let me be clear about that. But if you compared them, I have a lot more sympathy for the core technical arguments as far as like the ability to do more of these things makes Bitcoin more useful, and the negative effects of those are just not realistic to my opinion. Again, I'm not super technical into the weeds, so I could be wrong. That's just my feeling. On the other side of things, Knots does feel a lot more grassroots, like legitimately, not just astroturfed. And a lot of the people on the Knots side of things seem to be caring about what I care about with Bitcoin, or what I care about with crypto in general. That I guess it's good if Bitcoin has it too, which is being money, being actual uncensorable money. And that's kind of the way things are sort of pitched. I do feel like the money users in Bitcoin today, in BTC today, are kind of like late to the party ish. Like if you were looking for money, you should have gone off to one of these other like shit coins or whatever, or done a hybrid thing where you save in Bitcoin and then swap into something else and use that for your real money kind of thing. And you probably should have been there for a while and fighting over how much data, like what kind of data is stored on the chain versus normal payments that still the whole world cannot afford to use. I think I did like the napkin math of like if you wanted 7 billion people to make a single Bitcoin transaction, it would take like 25 years or more to just for all of them to make one. And I know Roger Ver said this a whole lot in the past, but like definitely the Bitcoin chain provides sovereignty and utility to people who use it today, but that's a very, very small group of people, like a million or two maybe, that are able to make like a few transactions a week kind of thing.
A few transactions a week might be exactly the amount of demand that all these central bankers might have. So
Mm-hmm.
depends on who your users are, right? Like if you look at, all the interaction with El Salvador and whatnot, a lot of it was, spearheaded by people at Blockstream, right? After all the forking and whatnot. So they then became, in position of authority to, speak with all these world leaders around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, screw the technicals. Who cares about technicals if you can just control the entire economy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should mention something about the Rage and Lola Leets who commented on this thing. They published an article a while ago that was about the U.S. government to bring the Patriot Act to digital assets that kind of uncovered a lot of things about how basically the U.S. government is basically banning privacy, including making new addresses for every like single-use addresses being like banned, and that they're banned now in the U.S. kind of thing. And the source of information and the reporting was very good and reliable, but the interpretation in that was, I would consider, hyperbolic and incorrect. Because when I later covered this on a show, broke it down, what are they exactly saying? What are some legal experts, like Coin Center, for example, I believe, commented on this and said that's sort of true, but not exactly true. It's just, some of the rule make is different. I mean, there's a whole, we could go for an hour on that subject in particular, but basically this is not the first time that the Rage has published something which cited accurate information, but sensationalized it into the wrong outcome. Let me just say. So it's not like I see the Rage and Lola cover something, I'm like, oh, that must be the truth. I'm like instantly skeptical when I see it because this has happened in the past. And it does seem to be the case with this Luke thing. I'm guessing the messages that were the leaked messages were legitimate. I'm guessing that they are. But the conclusions of what he meant by these things, as we cover the hard fork thing, he does not want to split the chain. I'm very confident on that at this point, but he's painted as doing such. That's kind of a hit piece a little bit. It's just kind of interesting now that they're doubling down. I'm showing this post by the Rage, which has some like comments from Mechanic, who's one of the top knots people, or Ocean Pool, I should say, saying Dashjr's ocean mining chief boiling officer does not deny message authenticity. Says it's called having a discussion, getting in front of unlikely scenarios, better prepared than if you hadn't. So they're basically like doubling down on like our story was accurate, even though Luke is saying liar about everything in it. And it's like, well, it's accurate, but I'm thinking the conclusions they drew are not accurate, even if the data is, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, quite honestly, if you just have a small snapshot of the entire conversation, then a lot of the context will be missed out, right? And then you just throw it to the mob and let them have fun, and then it just becomes a character all by itself. And at that point, the truth really doesn't matter. It's just public perception.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Mark does comment on this, by the way. Risen says, I only know Lola from her Tornado Catch coverage. Seemed fair to me, but could be getting only a small slice. Yeah, it was, as I mentioned, it's fair and accurate. I don't know Lola personally, by the way, even though we're in some Telegram groups and stuff together. I would assume, and if you're watching, she's probably not watching this, but if she is, feel free to reach out to me. We'll chat. But I kind of, I don't know if I describe any ill will, but there are some things, some what I would call inaccurate conclusions from my perspective on some of these things. And so, that's one of those things where it is a tangent that could go on forever. Journalists in the past, from my understanding, used to have very like industry specific knowledge. So if you were like a law reporter, maybe you didn't have a law degree, but you had legal expertise, so you knew how to interpret the things you're working on. And if you're obviously a crypto reporter, you know how to do this. And so, like, I was a Cointelegraph reporter at the same time as I'm using crypto as my daily money. And so, therefore, I kind of know how it works. And in the industry, when I'm reporting on something, I'm not copy and pasting a dumb headline. I kind of know how it works. And I kind of, in terms of like, I don't think Lola's a legal expert of any kind. Neither am I, but legal experts have interpreted the stuff slightly differently. So that might be where that's missed. And as far as like being a Luke Jr. expert, I don't think anyone is other than a few people. So that's no blame at all for being like, well, he said hard fork. He didn't mean chain split. You know this, right? It's like, well, why would I? Because everyone means this kind of thing. Which is why, by the way, people use the term hard fork to mean chain split. Whenever I talk about a chain split, I say chain split because I know that hard fork upgrades are very common in things where the chain doesn't split. I just want to be accurate there.
Yeah, I mean, I basically just come to call the yearly upgrades just network upgrades. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, technically they are forks, but it's not very helpful, right? Um, I'll say this. I'll say this. I think I think the Nos camp
Mm-hmm.
has a very good point to bring out that I don't think they're communicating effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is that quite honestly, they're kind of like a counter reaction to, Bitcoin Core, the whoever is managing Core, right? Just unanimously pushing their new upgrades with the offer turn and whatnot through with no discussion, with no nothing like that. So like at the end of the day, it is good to see some camp, some party trying to, like highlight and bring out, there is discourse. This is not a consensus driven, process for upgrading the op returns and whatnot, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
highly contentious. It's not even like necessarily needed for the community. Um, so yeah, like I don't know what exactly is going behind the scene, right? But at the end of the day, it's good to show that, for a network to actually survive, you need to be able to go through these kinds of discourses, right?
Mm-hmm.
If there is going to be attackers, it could be from external or from internal factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you just need to make sure that, like the entire network is actually resilient enough that either it fights it off or, just, have some sort of settlements. But yeah, like right now with, essentially Core just pushing out all this kind of stuff, using all of the, like the social media tactics and whatnot, if that's how BTC wants to run things, then yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if people decide to look elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of in the or if the first block size war, this would be the second one. It's more the block data, whatever you call it. But in the first conflict, Core kind of gave the illusion that this was a broad-based consensus from everyone else, and then they had the mob on their side, so therefore it made sense. This one, they kind of didn't anticipate a war, so they just did what they were always doing, which is just saying this is how it's going to be. We're going to do it, and then they got an unanticipated war, and now it's a little bit more obvious that they were just always pulling the strings. And now the underhanded tactics, like you don't do this kind of setup like you have with Luke Jr. right now. You don't have that kind of a setup without experience in doing setups, without experience running the Dragon's Den and doing these kind of like flame wars and bot wars and getting Thamos to censor this and that. And like, if you don't have those skills from that, you're not going to show them again this time. And it is like, I do think that the conversation of like, as I said, I'm more sympathetic technically to the core side of things, but also the use case of money, I think, is so much more important. So I understand the not side from there. I think there could be a resolution of those two things somewhere through discussion. But you have Core, which is not interested in consensus, and then you have Luke, who is not a consensus brained person. He's just very much like 300 kilobytes or you're literally raping me. Like, well, he's definitely not, he's an extremist, right? He's not a consensus. So you have these two head to head things. and that's kind of how you turn into this. And I kind of wish they would both get out of the way. Again, I'm not. I'm more watching Bitcoin from afar with popcorn. Like I'm not necessarily
Yeah.
very invested. If I were, I would want both parties to get out of the way and get the community to actually come together and talk about the like
I
is
mean,
yeah.
quite honestly, Joel, it's like the easiest solution is just to retract the op return upgrade proposal, right? That's the simplest one.
Mm-hmm.
Because like the taproot is still going to be there. You're still going to be able to put all that arbitrary data in there, right? So that's not going to change.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to, like censor data on the chain and whatnot, you can still do that to a certain degree, right? Like you could do, all these ZK proofs to say this subset of the UTXOs or like these transactions, we're just gonna not pay attention to or whatever, right? But again, it's really not a technical discussion anymore. It's really just social, right? Who actually is in control of this network, and how do they actually want, the network to actually play out?
Yeah, it is very interesting to see. I do kind of feel like the unresolved problems of the first block size war are just manifesting themselves again, and I definitely agree with like the withdraw the thing because I kind of feel like the Knots side has gone to a place where Bitcoin has not been since like the first block size war, as far as like all those things that are starting to be enabled and encouraged. Because let's not forget that like SegWit took a 1 megabyte block size and turned it to a potentially 4 megabyte block weight. Where, as far as I'm, again, not super technical on all this stuff, but from my understanding, it was just 1 megabyte of data, and now it's like 1 megabyte of normal data, but you can fit up to 4 megabytes of witness data if you know, aggregate the signatures elsewhere with its certain kind of data. So it literally, since SegWit it was created, Bitcoin has become purposed for non-financial transactions, not just payments. And now Knots is like the Knots group is like caring about that, but it's been like a decade almost. It's been, I would say, 8 years of SegWit, right? So it's been like 8 years of continuing down this data path, and the bigger op return, the unlimited op return per transaction, is just the latest step. And I don't feel like Knots is like the Knots group is like, okay, that was too far. Everything else was fine. That was too far. I kind of feel like they're like, that is too far. And by the way, our heart is in before SegWit, even though we haven't actually said we need to remove SegWit because they're not going to do that. And I kind of feel like the discussion over the data thing, like should we actually increase the op return size? I don't think that was really had. It was just like, yeah, it's a good idea, let's do it. And there wasn't enough of like a fight over it or a discussion. There's tons of soul searching left in Bitcoin, which is what happens when you, again, going back to my Bcashy sort of roots, pre-cashy, I should say, of this is what happens when you arbitrarily, at the behest of someone like Core, restrict the capacity for on chain to handle everyone's payments, and then you have all these other problems that never had a real answer to, that are still there, that no one's ever answered, of like, how are you going to pay for things on the chain, who is going to use the chain, what purposes, how, like, all this like stuff was sort of gaslit and like brushed away to be like, no, we can't increase the block size. And I kind of feel like if you forgot the past and today you just said, you know what, we're going to hard fork Bitcoin, not chain split, but hard fork upgrade Bitcoin to remove SegWit and tap, like, I don't know if you even remove these things. Well, yeah, remove all those data things, but go to like a 4+ megabyte block size. I think that if you forgot the history, I think the Knots folks would be other, not Luke because he's crazy, but the rest of them would be like, this is good. Bitcoin is still, everyone can run their node, but it's monetary only transactions and more people can use it. But anyway, we can't have a reasonable discussion like that today, though. That's the sad part.
At the end of the day, like Bitcoin could upgrade, it can do all these kind of things. It can go up against Ethereum, no problem, right?
Hmm.
The issue is not on the technology side, but on the social layer, right? People, quite honestly, if you're if the end goal is to make sure you're not going underwater by all this money printing from the central banks, then yeah, the less risk you take and the faster that these banks collapse, the better it is for Bitcoin, right? What happens afterwards is a whole entire different story, right? People, if you can't do your transactions, let's say if you're a government entity, right? You can't do transactions on Bitcoin because
Hmm.
there's so much backlog and blah 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 blah. How does that help?
Hmm.
How does that help an economy that's, trying to de-dollarize and all that kind of stuff, right? You still need to make it useful at the end of the day. So yeah, it's until I guess, like there's an actual crisis in BTC, I don't think anyone's really gonna care. They're just gonna sit back, watch it passively from their, couch or their computer desk, and it's like, hey, I might be able to retire sometime soon, right?
Yeah, and I also think that I wrote this article last few days that was basically saying how Bitcoin's killer app is still peer to peer electronic cash. And basically said that the reason why Bitcoin's such a good store of value today is because for what most people need it for, it still works better than anything for peer to peer cash. Meaning you could send and receive transactions for relatively cheap. Maybe they'll show up in an hour or so, or it's not that slow for big transfers. It's like no one's censoring these things so far. Like it's I think that the it comes to a head later, right? Where you talk about like the big blockers were saying, "Oh, down the road, you're gonna need all this extra capacity," and we haven't needed it yet, but now we do. I think before we get to the next level of adoption, and like Lightning is turning very custodial because there isn't a big enough block size or to be able to do the more peer-to-peer style of Lightning, where everyone runs their own node kind of thing. And again, like I'm not being, I understand
Yeah,
that.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's the block size issue, but then there's also like there's on the transaction side, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that the Bitcoin Covenants is able to help with is actually on the settlement for the Lightning channels.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of relying on all these fancy multisig and potential backstabbing, you're
Mm-hmm.
just straight up enforcing who are the only parties that can get paid and for how much, right? So all
Mm-hmm.
those are pre-assigned in there, but yeah, it's quite honestly, like I said, right? If we're just talking purely technicals, like we would have been seeing Bitcoin, like we would not see Solana and Cardano and all these different chains pop up, right? We'll
Mm-hmm.
be seeing mostly just Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum doing all the R&D and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's far too experimental for the people that's, just trying to hedge themselves against the US dollar. So fine, so be it, right? But there comes to a point where after you do all that hedging, if you're assuming you're not on the dollar, you still need to use it for the goods, for all the services, for all the trades and whatnot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we're just really not there. It's kind of like, Gresham's law. The bad money still works.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no reason to pay with good money when the bad money still works, right? It's only until with the bad money stops working that people are like, oh, the Titanic is now sinking. We should get on the lifeboats.
Mm-hmm.
Has anyone tested those lifeboats to make sure they're actually working, right?
Yeah. Crazy. Uh, this seems like a good time to start wrapping up, or at least wrapping up that part of things. Is there
Sure.
anything else you wanted to bring up while we're here?
Um, I need to buy more popcorn, I guess.
Yeah. Long popcorn. Is there like something on any hedge that lets you hedge the price of popcorn or whatever?
I don't think on any hedge, but I think we could probably make something on the poly market.
Nice. Yeah, that would be fun about like the price of popcorn from all this. Just while we're at that general subject, is there anything else in the crypto space that you're looking at with like glee and drama at, you know, glee at the drama, like the popcorn vibes? Is it just Bitcoin at the moment?
I mean, mostly for what I want to focus on, it's heavily into the technical side of things, as well
Mm-hmm.
as the mainstream adoption, right? So. a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
companies, it's not just the treasury companies and whatnot, but also companies trying to actually tokenize these real world assets. Um, so yeah, it's a lot of these like I'm more of the guy where I want to see what's the mainstream going to be seeing in like the next year, 18 months and whatnot. Like what will be important for them? Because then for me, it's like it's easier for me to be early working on this kind of stuff and then
We're
building
so
it out.
early.
But yeah, overall, it's just trying to see like where exactly the overall sentiments are, not just from like retail people, but also these larger institutions trying to get
Mm-hmm.
in and all that kind of stuff. And I guess I should also mention that I am partly organizing helping out with the Bitcoin Cash hackathon coming up in November. So the idea is to really showcase not just how far Bitcoin Cash has come in terms of the development side of things, but also try to see what kind of ideas and what kind of projects people um, can realistically work on and build. And hopefully, like we'll be able to support them later on down the road as
Yeah, makes sense to me. Um, cool. And let's do a shout out for anywhere you want to link. It's chill o'clock, as it turns out. I'll put up your X on the uh, on the screen, and then anything else you want to show.
Yeah, I guess mostly it'll just be the BCH Blaze hackathon. So people
Mm-hmm.
can go to bchblaze.cash and there should be a link. Oh, it's it's a very, very small link, hyperlink to the DoorHacks website.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, definitely I would encourage people to sign up. Next year's upgrade, you know, it's probably not the right technical terminology for this, but I don't really care because we're talking about all this stuff, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we're mostly going to be making Bitcoin Cash, quote unquote, turn complete come next year with
Liar. Just kidding.
yeah, no, it's just it's a marketing turn complete. It's not real turn complete.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, things like loops, we've enabled opcode cost that's very similar to Ethereum. So we won't have infinite loops. It's finally going to be turn complete. Hopefully people with all these Solidity smart contracts and all this kind of stuff, they can start porting some of that over and yeah, just see what a UTXO chain can do versus an account-based chain.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Yeah, threw that up on the screen. Um, yeah, I would like to make it to Bliss one of these years. It's just tricky with conference season, and I already feel like, despite going to so many conferences, that I'm like missing out because everyone's on like the Asia leg right now, like Singapore and
Yeah.
Korea and stuff, and I'm just not. Yeah, I'm like FOMO.
Well, next year I'll definitely be going to BCH Bliss. I
Hmm.
don't think there's going to be any major conferences around that time, so it might just be perfect timing.
Yeah, uh, I would hope that it gets sort of scheduled to have parallel times with the Crypto Canal conference in Amsterdam, just like it was ETHDAM this year. And I know that Mathieu came from Belgium over to the conference in Amsterdam, and then he went right to Bliss right afterwards. And I know some other people. I don't know if everyone did there. I think a couple other people did too.
Mm.
I think can't tell if Milan of NanoGPT did that too. I don't remember specifically. I think he did, or I'm getting my dates confused. But yeah, so it's always kind of a good time to like bookend things.
We'll just talk with Eleanor, who's organizing Eat Dam. So yeah, just coordinate with her. She's pretty cool with the BCH community as well, so shouldn't be too hard to set up that back.
Yes, definitely. I'll see if I can get. It would be interesting. There's so many conferences that I need to go to that now I'm going to try to recruit for the organizers, like conferences,
Mm.
like attendees and speakers and stuff, because I tend to do that when I see a conference I want to go to. I want to like get everyone I want to speak at that conference to go. I kind of did that with ETHDAM this year, and yeah, it'll be fun. But yeah, good stuff. All right, well, thanks very much for being on. It's been let me famous last words maybe. I hope this is the last coverage of the Knots drama that I do on this thing. I hope it's like just because I've done like two shows and a space on it already, and I'm just like done with it. But there might be something spicy that comes up next. So never say never.
I'm willing to bet money that this is not going to be your last show on this topic.
Give me a week off though, please. Give me 2 weeks. I don't know, something. I don't want to be next week. Luke Jr. flies a plane into Blockstream headquarters. Like, oh no, I have to cover it now. Like, I hope it's
Well,
nothing like that.
no, no, it better not be that. Otherwise, that would be a terrible joke.
Yes. Oh, can you imagine? It's like then people are gonna be,
Yeah,
what did he know? Like looking at me.
yeah. But yeah, no, I think there's gonna be quite a bit more drama. Maybe not next week, but I would definitely say before the end of this year, we're gonna be hearing more about this.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. This has been a pleasure. Thanks, Jerry, for being on, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye bye.